conference today, and we are very honored to have Mr. Edward Munyamaliza, who is the chairperson of the Civil Society Platform, of the Rwanda Civil Society Platform, and we also honored to have Mr. Len Mears, who is the current chairperson of the international NGOs. I also want to recognize the presence of Honorable Juvenal Musi, who is the chairperson of the Parliamentary Accounts Committee. I also want to recognize the presence of Mr. Sheikh Saleh Habimana from Rwanda Governance Board, who is the director in charge of NGOs, national NGOs, faith-based organizations, and political parties. There could be other dignitaries that are present. I want to recognize you in your respective honors. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish to give you a slight background for this public dialogue. For the last 2 days, the Rwanda Civil Society organizations have been participating in a capacity building or capacity strengthening session aimed at enhancing the capacities of Rwanda Civil Society organizations in terms of engaging in the aid and development effectiveness discourse. Many of you are very aware that this process has been going on since actually 2000 and slightly earlier than 2005, when there was the Paris Declaration that aimed at committing government and development partners to ensure that there is accountability and effective use of donor funds to ensure that what it is intended for is achieved. This process has been going on, and several countries and donor development partners have already committed to this. And this meeting that we are holding today comes after a very recent meeting in Busan, South Korea, which actually emphasized the role of the civil society as a very strong partner in ensuring that aid and development is effected in our own countries. And this is why we are here today to affirm our commitment to this process and to declare our strong position in terms of working with our own governments and development partners in ensuring that aid and development achieve its intended objective. So without saying a lot, we will be able to listen to several presentations. There is a research or a study that has been carried out here in Rwanda to determine the impact of aid effectiveness in this country. I think that will be a very interesting presentation that many of us are looking forward to hearing and then participating or providing our inputs. We will also have the government of Rwanda position on whether the Busan conference has helped to untie aid. We shall also have an opportunity to listen to the perspective of the civil society organizations on the trend on tied aid and conditionality, and give an overview of challenges faced by the civil society organizations in their engagement in the aid development effectiveness. We shall also hear from the Parliament, our own Parliament here, beyond Parliament's oversight role and how to mitigate the unpredictability of aid. I think we all know or realize that aid sometimes is not predictable, and therefore the Parliament, whereas it ensures that national resources are effectively used, they also have to be in a position to know how to mitigate or to cope with the changes that may come as a result of aid that is increasingly becoming unpredictable. Basically, we will also have an opportunity to launch the study, which I think will be available to everybody, so that we can have a common position on how, on the impact of aid in Rwanda. So basically, without wasting a lot of time, our program is going to look like that, and we are also going to have communique statements issued before the end of this conference by the civil society, as well as the government of Rwanda. And we are hoping that even the development partners may also issue a statement. So with those few remarks, let me also call Action Aid, one of the co-organizers of this conference, to come to the front. I believe Innocent should be presenting Action Aid. I also want to recognize Trocare, which has been a co-founder and a co-organizer of this conference. I'm not sure whether they are here. If they are, we could also ask them to come to the front. And if they are not, we wish to recognize their presence and their support for this conference. So let me take this opportunity to ask the spokesperson for the Rwanda Civil Society platform to make his welcome remarks, and then I'll be able to let you know what follows next. Thank you.
And also for the ideas that you'll be providing in this session. And also apologize for some of the people who could not make it to this meeting. Yesterday, the Minister of Finance told me they have a cabinet meeting, and he could not be able to come, though he had planned to be here with us. Also, thank the people who have been with us since day before yesterday, discussing on aid and development effectiveness. As John mentioned, it was a kind of information sharing session that we have been conducting since Wednesday, where we really wanted that as civil society actors, we understand the implications of aid and development effectiveness, and also discuss on the role the civil society needs to play in the process. So I would like to also thank various partners who are here present, and undoubtedly I hope that we are going to forge a common understanding and a way to engage in aid and development effectiveness agenda, and especially recognizing that the role of civil society it's a bit different from the role of the government and the role of development partners in aid and development effectiveness, and also knowing that civil society being actors close to the population, they have a distinct role to play, especially in terms of ensuring that aid and development agenda are being creating an impact on the lives of the people. If I go a bit back to the history of aid effectiveness up to the idea or the concept of development effectiveness from Paris Declaration via the Accra Agenda for Action to the Busan Declaration. The role of civil society has been defined and redefined. You remember that the Accra Agenda for Action provided for a space for civil society engagement. But particularly in Rwanda, I would say we played the role, but we need really to reinforce it and do more than we have done in the past. Because most of you will agree with me that there are many instances where the civil society has been going short of expectation, or sometimes missing in some areas where it's needed, or sometimes playing an insufficient role in making sure that aid is being used in an effective and sustainable way. Particularly going back to the Busan Declaration, the role of civil society has been redefined, and emphasis is now being put on human rights issues, where the civil society organizations are encouraged to work hand in hand in partnership with the government to make sure that development agendas are pro-poor and human rights based, and also responding to the real needs of the population. So, and that's really a responsibility that the civil society of Rwanda should be playing, especially now that we are in the process of making another new generation of EDPRS, where ideas and contributions are needed from various actors, and especially from civil society organizations. We have also to recognize that in the spirit of the Paris Declaration, there is a need of being accountable. Accountability is each and everyone's responsibility in the process. And that's why civil society will endeavor to hold its partners accountable, while it will also make sure that it's also doing its operations in a transparent and accountable way. You remember there was a study conducted in 2010. It started in 2010 and it was published in 2011, that showed that civil society had received in 2010 a financial support of around $400 million. So I think that is a challenge, where when discussing on the outcomes of EDPRS, there was a little to show on what civil society has achieved together with the government and the other actors in general. So again, if accountability is to be requested, is to be demanded on the side of the government, on the side of the donors, it has to be primarily demanded on the side of the civil society organizations as well. And again, you know that this process of implementing the Paris Declaration, it's really a process that builds or is based on principles where each party has to respect and implement its roles and responsibilities. So we are, as a civil society, looking on how we can position ourselves and engage in a partnership that we allow to monitor each other in the process and make sure each party is living up on its commitments. I would like to just see how we as a civil society can come together and be aware of our role, be aware of the responsibilities that awaits us in this process, and also see how we can strengthen our solidarity, build our synergies in making sure that we can engage in the process in an effective way. I would like to end here thanking everybody for making it to this meeting, and thanking everybody for the contributions that you are going to make, and also the commitments that you are going to take and implement in the course of making aid and development more effective and impactful in the lives of the people of Rwanda. I would also thank our partners, ActionAid, Tracare, and also our partners from the network of international NGOs for the collaborations, and also for the support they continue to providing in these efforts. I would also and especially thank the government of Rwanda for the work they have done. You know that Rwanda has scored the highest in the world in terms of using the aid in an effective and transparent way. So, and also for allowing a space for the civil society to play a partner role in this process. I thank you so much, and I wish you a good day and also very healthy discussions. Thank you so much.
I'm called Innocent Mtabaruka, not Mtabazi. As you've heard from the MC, I'm presenting the country director who is currently out of the country, and I'm in charge of programs and policy. Chairperson, Rwanda Civil Society Platform, Chairperson, International NGO Forum, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as you've heard from the chairperson, Rwanda is one of the poorest countries in the world, but it has made dramatic development progress in recent years, rebuilding the country and of course moving it towards sustainable development. ActionAid as an international organization, we're also in this journey of poverty eradication. Of course, approaching this poverty eradication using a human-based approach, which the Busana meeting came out clearly. So it's on that background that ActionAid was part of the organizers of this important meeting, but then also commissioned a search on the impact of aid effectiveness in Rwanda. Why do we want to go that way? Because we are an organization that is based on evidence. We do advocacy work, but we do it from the facts. It's in that regard that in partnership with IPAD, we commissioned the research, and I think in a few minutes to come, we'll be able to see the results, the findings, and maybe as civil society organizations, the non-state actors, we can take it up to make sure that we impact the people we are serving down there in the communities. Rwanda receives at least $1 billion overseas aid every year. And in line with aid effectiveness in Rwanda, we would ask who benefits at the end of the day. Is it the government? Is it the civil society? Or is it the right holders, the people that we serve in different communities? One would also ask that, is this investment worth benefits that we are getting? Are the donors keeping their commitments? Those are critical issues that we need also to analyze and think through as civil society organizations and non-state actors that are part of this journey of transforming people's lives. And of course, once we internalize and interact with this question, we can get some interesting responses. For the last 2 days, we've been reflecting on Accra meeting, the Paris Declaration, the Busana meeting. There are a lot of pledges that came out from these important meetings. And there were a lot of investments and the thinking that were invested in these important meetings. But then at the end of the day, who benefits? Is it the right holders? Who benefits at the end of the day? How are we taking these commitments and apply them practically on the ground? This is very important for us to reflect on such a kind of issues. It's good that Rwanda was one of the countries that is better using aid. Some of us that are community-rooted, that are community-based, it is evident that people are benefiting from this aid. When you talk to people, when you see them, you really see that there's some change that is happening down there. But then, is that change, is that impact enough? We need to do more as a country, as non-state actors, to make sure that, yes, we're in the right track, but we need to reflect back and see what is working and what is not working, and how can we do things differently in a view of transforming the right holders. Some of us that are interacting with the community people, we really find that some of them are not actually right holders. They are the service holders. You give them. And maybe one could question that, yes, aid effectiveness, who benefits? We are just talking about from an ordinary farmer down the village, who is not aware about these commitments in Paris, in Accra, and in South Korea, but who is interested in accessing quality extension services, who is interested in accessing credit to make sure that he improves his farmland. We are interested in looking at this Rwandan down the village who are struggling to access quality education. So in the view of looking at aid effectiveness, we need also to bring back these good theories in practice. And maybe we can say, what can we do differently as civil society, as the government, as development partner, to make sure that the change we want to see is happening. I must recognize and acknowledge that Rwanda is one of the best countries that is using aid effectively. And it received a recognition internationally. But then we need to see, and this is actually reflected in the recent household survey, But then we need to keep going to make sure that the change we want to see is happening. There are a number of issues that maybe we'll be discussing, or maybe the report will also be unveiling. We need to interact with those findings to make sure that the change we want to see is happening. What is the role of the civil society organization? Are we doing enough to make sure that we do whatever we are supposed to do effectively? What's the role of the donor? What is the development partner doing? So we need also to question at a different level, but at the end of the day, we want to see change happening. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, it's up to us who are gathered here to play our critical and effective role and move out of these, declarations that we sign, and make sure that these declarations and these commitments that we sign are practically working. And maybe you can reflect and see, yes, we had a meeting in Serena this particular time, these were the recommendations, and maybe this is how far we have gone in terms of implementing those recommendations. Those are the issues that we need to interact. We come out from these offices and then have this series practically apply to the common ordinary farmer down there in Southern Province or Northern Province or in Eastern Province. Once again, I want to thank Rwanda Civil Society and international NGOs and Procare for the support provided in this endeavor. And I want also to applaud our government for providing a conducive environment for us to operate and provide the policy framework so that we're able to make this impact that we are supposed to make. I thank you for your kind attention.
For us. You're most welcome.
Thank you, John. My name is Lane Mears. I'm the Country Director for International Justice Mission and the Chairman for the Network of International NGOs. I want to thank the Rwanda Civil Society platform, ActionAid, Procare, and distinguished guests here for having this important dialogue. NINGO, the Network of International NGOs, is a network of more than 55 international NGOs that meet monthly to talk about issues related to development and how international NGOs can play a part in that. And so we're very, on behalf of NINGO, very excited to be here and be a part of this dialogue. In December of 2011, the Busan Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation Outcome document was published, and it clarified the important role that civil society organizations have in development. And that, as a member of the civil society, and as others who are members of the civil society here, that's an exciting thing, to have that document published and to clarify our role in development. And so I, on behalf of NINGO, am here to pledge NINGO's commitment towards partnership, towards transparency, towards accountability in working toward development effectiveness for all Rwandans. And again, very thankful for this dialogue, and I'm sure that it will be productive, and I hope and want to encourage everyone here to take part, and I'm sure the outcome will have benefit for all in this country. Without further ado, it's my honor to declare this dialogue officially open. Thank you.
So, what we're looking at is aid effectiveness, right in Rwanda. So who benefits from the aid that is sent in Rwanda? receives at least $1 billion a year in development assistance. That is just the figure from the OECD Development Assistance Database. It doesn't include a lot of other money that comes into Rwanda as different forms of development assistance or development cooperation. So, just to emphasize that, there are at least 3 different types of what might broadly be thought of as development assistance or development cooperation. There's what we have traditionally called development assistance, north-south development assistance from the OECD countries. Secondly, there is what often gets referred to as new development assistance, but it's not that new, but which is south-south development cooperation. China has been providing development cooperation in Rwanda, for example, since the 1950s. So it's not new, but it is increasingly seen as important. And then thirdly, there is a development cooperation, assistance, funding that comes directly to NGOs or comes from charitable foundations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So all of these are part of the development cooperation that helps to fund Rwanda. And it comes to quite a lot. It's quite difficult to estimate how much, but it's certainly over 60% of the equivalent of the government's budget. It's also important, I'm going to use technical terms, you probably all know them, so forgive me if I'm telling you what you know. But when we're talking about aid effectiveness, the debates hinge around, to quite a large extent, the way aid is given. Firstly, there's general budget support. That's when the donor says, here we are, Rwanda, you can have this money for your budget to fund your policies and programs. Secondly, there is sector budget support when a donor says you can have this money for funding a particular sector. So in Rwanda, for example, education is a sector that has a very high level of sector budget support coordinated by DFID. Then there's project support. Project support is when a donor funds a separate project. So they have a separate project implementation unit that delivers the project. So I'm involved, Mary, wherever she is from Rwanda Women's Network, is involved with a UN project to make Kigali a safer city for women. The funding goes directly from UN to Rwanda's Women's Network. Never passes by the government. Right. There is then both on and off budget technical project support. That's important. Under the Rwandan constitution, Parliament is supposed to have oversight of government spending, or public sector spending. It can only do that effectively and in a transparent way if it knows how much is being used to fund the government programme. Not all development partners, if I put it crudely, get their act together in time or are prepared to tell the government what they are giving in development assistance over the next year so that it can be included in the budget. And that's important. There's technical support which can come in terms of equipment or people. So the UN, for example, UN volunteers, a lot of that is through technical support. German cooperation quite a proportion of their aid comes through technical support, but it does for all donors. Then there is tide aid. I don't think there's a lot now of tide aid in Rwanda, apart from the South-South aid, like the Chinese. That is where the donor says, we will support X, but all the equipment, all the personnel have to be purchased from our country, and that increases costs. And then there's a sector-wide approach, which can use any aid modality. It's when all the donors agree to work together to implement a government's programme in a given sector, whether they're doing that through funding projects or whether they're doing it by actually giving the money as sector-wide support. Right, this just gives an indication of the different types of funding that can be supporting Rwanda's development. The top line, the orange line, is development assistance. That is only the development assistance that is recorded on the OECD database. It's virtually the same as the government have recorded on their database. The blue line is taxation. Now, in order to become less aid dependent, Rwanda is very aid dependent, tax has to increase. Tax has been increasing, but as you can see, it's not really increasing in relationship to aid. Someone in the British Parliament last week said that more development assistance should go to helping governments in the South improve their tax collection. In fact, DFID funded a project to support Rwandan Revenue Authority to develop its tax collection mechanisms from the late 1990s until about 2007-8. The red line is the foreign direct investment. So investment, private sector investment to build companies in Rwanda, which will of course pay taxes, hopefully, and will employ Rwandans, hopefully. So help support the social and economic development of Rwanda. One of the government's main drivers of its policy is to increase private sector investment, including foreign direct investment. The yellow line is remittances. Right? Some countries in the south, or even Moldova, which I think is probably in the north, have very large remittances, which help to fund the country. One of the other countries that has done a report like I have for the EU, that is its major income. It's even higher than its development assistance. So it can be a very important source of revenue. And as you know, the government with its Dignity Fund is targeting the diaspora as well as local people to invest in Rwanda's development. Next. Right. When we talk about aid, we also are talking about a global partnership for development. The Global Partnership for Development since 2000 has been strongly driven by the MDGs. So the MDGs have been the glue, if you like, that's held it together. It's not the only thing that development assistance has supported, but the MDGs have been seen as extremely important. And the MDGs have 2015 targets. Rwanda, I'm told, differently from many other countries, has actually incorporated the MDGs into its development framework, into Vision 2020 and into EDPRS 1. but has gone beyond the MDGs and has also looked to support governance reforms and, crucially, to invest in economic growth, while at the same time trying to ensure that that growth is pro-poor, that it benefits the poor as well as the better off. So Rwanda's policies have been designed to invest in growth, in sustainable growth, increase that tax base, attract foreign direct investment, to help build that tax base so that Rwanda can gradually move away from aid dependency and into self-sustained development. Okay. So, one of the things since 2000 has been the agreement to make aid more effective. And again, that's part of a partnership. On the one hand, the official development partners have said they will give aid in ways that will ensure that it has maximum impact. In other words, as much as possible gets spent on the poor or on supporting the developing countries' policies. And the governments in the south have in turn said that they will use that aid to drive their development, but also to improve their systems, their delivery systems, their financial systems, so that they can effectively and efficiently manage that aid, so that donors can have confidence that if they give general budget support and project budget support, the money will be well handled. So we can ask, to what extent has aid delivery improved in Rwanda, and to what extent has the aid that is coming into Rwanda actually having an effect on reducing poverty and inequality? Next. So the Paris Declaration is about transparency. Everyone knowing how much aid there is. It's about alignment. It's about donors making certain that the aid that they provide funds the government's programme, that it is spent in the most effective and efficient way possible, which suggests that it should be spent through the government's mechanism. So you don't have parallel institutions delivering projects, you don't have parallel financial mechanisms. And it's about ensuring coordination to reduce transaction costs, so that governments don't have a continuing succession of donor visits to look at the same policy, to look at the same projects, all taking up valuable time and detracting from the ability to actually deliver the project. Next. Right, so the government in 2006 passed an aid policy. That aid policy, or the impact of that aid policy, or the outcome, led to Rwanda being awarded an A grade ahead of Busan for the way in which its policy was improving the delivery of aid. So the government has a preference for general budget support followed by sector-wide support. The government has reformed its public sector finance system and undertaken a number of other reforms to improve the way it handles public sector finance and can report on aid spending. So the government has gone a very long way to meeting the expectations of the Paris Declaration for improving aid delivery. Next. There is a development partners framework which is led by the government, So the government and the development partners work together to ensure, to monitor, to implement EDPRS and to look at the effectiveness of aid spending. NGOs, civil society, and the private sector are also involved in those discussions and deliberations. So the government, again, with the development partners, has put in place mechanisms to implement the partnership for more effective aid delivery. Next. Right, so the government has done a lot. What have the development partners done? Well, challenges still remain. If we look at the 2010-11, which is the most recent available review of the government's framework for measuring whether the development partners are living up to expectations, in aggregate, only 4 targets were met out of 18. Only 4 development partners scored at least 75% for meeting the targets. These are not targets the government set, these are targets that the development partners themselves have agreed that they will work towards meeting. They were the UK, the Netherlands, the EU, it's 5 actually, Germany and the World Bank. And there has been no change. They were the same top in the previous year, and the same ones were at the bottom as in the previous years. So there's been very little movement. DFID went backwards, it went from 100% to less than 100%. So the development partners then are being slow, many of them are being slow in implementing the commitments that they've made. Now I want to stress that the development partners that are slow on the whole in implementing the commitments in Rwanda are slow everywhere. It's not that Rwanda is somehow special. If you look at the ratings, at the academic research, you'll find it's the same development partners at the top and the bottom, whatever countries you look at. Next. Right, so we've had the aid policy. Rwanda has a lot of aid. I've been critical of the development partners, but I think one thing I would want to say is that my overall impression from doing several projects here, talking to both development partners and the government, is that whatever the issues between the home government, rules, regulations, laws that limit the ways in which they can meet the government's expectations, on the ground there is a lot of cooperation and a lot of commitment to EDPRS. So there is a lot of commitment to working to achieve the government's agenda. Right, so what has happened? Well, this graph shows GDP per capita. You can see that GDP per capita has risen very fast. One of the fastest growing GDP per capitas around, certainly in Africa, certainly the best in East Africa and the EAC. Just a word of caution, it has to double, right? Well, more than double. It has to double between that 2011 figure and 2020 for Rwanda to become a middle-income economy. So that rate of acceleration has to increase if Rwanda wants to hit a middle-income economy. Next. Right, so what else can we use to measure Rwanda's progress? 85% of the targets for EDPRS had already been met when the review was done earlier this year. So by the end of the year, I'm sure more will have been met. Right? So just to give you an example, water, which was seen as very slow, 74%, I think, of houses had clean water, according to the household survey in 2010-11. According to the ThinScope survey, which I'm analysing at the moment, that figure is now up to 80%. And I think it's probably accurate because the figure for sanitation is the same as the figure in the household survey. So clearly, progress is being made all the time. It's quite difficult sometimes to capture it. Rapid pace between 2005-6 and 2010-11 in poverty reduction. 12 percentage points. Very, very rapid poverty reduction. But, right, so lots of very positive things. But inequalities as measured by the Gini coefficient only marginally declined. And it's still very high, Gini coefficient. Right? It's not quite as bad as the banana republics of South America, but it's still high. There are major challenges confronting Rwanda. Population growth, right? 2.8%. Total fertility rate has gone down, but it is still high at 4.5%. For a different piece of work I did for ActionAid, and so the data's a little bit out of date, we calculated that the number of jobs being created by investors on average a year was a third of those required to absorb just new labour market entrants. That takes no account of the fact that there is low labour productivity, where on average in rural areas men work for something like about 25 hours a week. So those are challenges. Next. So let's just look at some of these trends. You can see that's a graph of poverty reduction. I think you can see Rwanda may not hit the 2015 target, but Rwanda has only just, or by 2010-11, had only just returned to the level of poverty that it had in 1990. And you can see there will need to be further acceleration to hit the 2015 target, but even at the current rate of progress, the 2015 hit target will be hit by about 2018. But I think you can see the tremendous progress that has been made. Next. However, there are still inequalities. One way we can look at inequalities from poverty is to look at nutrition, child nutrition. And you can see, if you look at the consumption quintiles, wealth quintiles, this is from DHS, sorry, you can see that children in the highest wealth quintiles have much higher, better levels of nutrition than children in the lowest wealth quintiles. However, I want to make another point about this. Stunting, which is the high figure, right, was picked up in EDPRS1 as a bottleneck. It's still a bottleneck. The progress on stunting has been slow. It's a stutter. Right, why is stunting so important? Stunting occurs between 6 months and 2 years. It leads to development delay and permanent cognitive impairment. In other words, children who are stunted will never develop their full intellectual capability. That not only limits their life chances, but also has a negative impact on the ability of them to contribute to the development of Rwanda. And stunting occurs in all wealth quintiles. So it's partly poverty. Certainly poor parents in Rwanda cannot afford the internationally recommended diet of 4 food groups a day when they only feed themselves on 2 food groups at best. But in the top wealth quintile, we have to assume there is also a lack of information. There's a lack of educating mothers about weaning children and feeding children. Next. Again, primary school. Rwanda won, I think, yesterday, was it in the paper? The Commonwealth Award for its 9-year basic education. Rwanda has nearly achieved the MDG for education. There's some debate about that, but right, I won't go into it. If someone wants to know, I'll explain. But again, we can see there are inequalities by wealth. However, under EDPRS 1, those inequalities have narrowed. So children from poorer homes are beginning to benefit and catch up. It's a slow process. For another report, I've worked out how many years it would take. But it's a slow process, but it is happening. Right, next. However, perhaps not surprisingly, children from better off homes are benefiting far more from the expansion in secondary education. So that's something that has to be worked at. That's partly because children take so long to make their way through school, primary school. That is also partly because children from poorer homes tend to start school late. Right? They're not getting in there, some of them, till they're 8 or even 9. So they're not getting through to come in to secondary education. Next. Right, another marker. Right, both in terms of economic development, but also in terms of MDGs. A new MDG target was added in 2005 to do with decent work, both in general and specifically for women. In Rwanda, a very high proportion of women are what are called dependent family workers. In other countries, they call them housewives. Right? In other words, they don't get paid for what they do, and it's seen as part of their duty as a wife and mother. There has, however, been a decline in the proportion of women whose only work is as a dependent family worker, but there's been a much more rapid decline in the number of men, usually young men, working for their fathers. So there's progress, but again, women are still much more likely than men. Nearly half of women work as dependent family workers. Next. Sorry, it hasn't got a heading. This is access to modern contraception. I mentioned the problem of population growth. You can see that from 2000 to 2010, there was a tremendous increase in the proportion of married women using modern contraception. Right? It's fantastic. It's still way short of the government's target, however, which is at 75%. But also, what that graph shows, and I think it's quite important, is that women from all wealth quintiles are using modern contraception. And the research we've done, other research we've done in Rwanda, suggests that that is driven by two major things. Community health workers who encourage women to use modern contraception, and the mutual health insurance that enables them to have it without paying, or paying a very small amount. And if you look at the graphs for the other East African community countries, you will find that they have very small proportions of married women using modern contraception, and they don't have community health workers, and they don't have mutual health insurance. Right, next. Again, access to improved sanitation. Again, I showed this one because that again shows a reduction in inequalities. It's a target that's on track to be met, and it shows a reduction in inequalities, that everyone is benefiting from improved sanitation. The one thing that's not changing is the proportion of households with no sanitation facility at all. Government's target for that was 0 in 2012. It hasn't moved at all. Next. So, what can we conclude from this? We can conclude that Rwanda has made fantastic development progress. I don't think there's any doubt about it. It is very difficult, impossible, to demonstrate that that dollar of development aid funded that project, let alone that that project had an impact. What we can say, the Australians have developed something that they call contribution analysis as a way of trying to get grips on the role that development aid plays. And I think what we can say, if we look at the amount of the government budget that comes from development aid, that clearly development aid has helped to fund the tremendous progress that Rwanda has made. There are signs, there's tiny green shoots, that aid dependency is beginning to decrease. The government is raising more money through taxation and other revenue. And the government now, of course, has its dignity fund as well. But Rwanda still remains above the threshold for being a heavily aid-dependent country, and that is likely to continue if the progress is to continue. Aid in Rwanda has funded the productive sectors as well as the social sectors. Most has gone to the social sectors, but aid has funded the productive sectors: agriculture, transport, industry. And the development partners are signalling, some of them, that they are going to increase that. DFID, for example, with the support of the government, is actually going to give some aid directly to the private sector in further years. The EC and other partners put a lot of money into agriculture. Aid to agriculture has been increasing. So we can see that that will help sustainable development. There's been strong economic growth, we saw the curve. And there are signs, I think there can only be said to be signs, of economic transformation. There is a reduction in the proportion of the population who are totally dependent on agriculture and even mainly dependent on agriculture, and an increase in the proportion of the population who are mainly or solely dependent on non-farm employment. But it's very early signs. There is, however, just to put another sting in the tail, an unsustainable trade deficit. Rwanda is importing significantly more than it's exporting, and at the moment that gap has to be funded, right? That money could be spent on other things. So, and domestic tax revenues, I keep saying this, have been increasing. Next. In terms of development assistance, well, there's certainly been some improvements in joint accountability. There is certainly evidence of the donors on the ground and the government working together. But there's been little movement since 2007-8 in development partners implementing the commitments they made in Paris, Accra, and Busan. That is rarely an issue of the local development partner. It is to do with back home. And in some cases it's to do with legislation in the development partner countries. The UN, for example, cannot give general budget support or sector budget support. So they told me anyway. So progress has been slow and challenges remain. society organisations and the private sector, from the government's own reviews and others, remains relatively weak and is not making the contribution that could be made towards supporting the government's development initiatives, but certainly in terms of COS, holding the government accountable, representing ordinary Rwandans, advocating on behalf of ordinary Rwandans. And there is a need, I think it's widely acknowledged need, for better information for citizens. People out there don't know their rights. Norwegian People's Aid funded, I think, a simplified guide to the devolution policy and to women's rights, because they were aware of how little knowledge Rwandans had of their law, of their rights, and people are confused, and if they don't know their rights, they can't claim them. Right? So when I did some research on land, it was quite clear that, and it's complex, the land law, that the ordinary Rwandans didn't necessarily understand their rights under the land law. If they don't know their rights, it's difficult to claim them. It's difficult to advocate for change. So, my final conclusion is, because everyone asks me this, why do I think, this is me, right? Why do I think that Rwanda has made such dramatic progress? And it has to be said, at least in part, it's despite not all the development partners coming into line with their commitments, with what is seen as the agenda for aid effectiveness. But I think if we look at what Rwanda has achieved, Rwanda has a vision. It has a strategy for implementing that vision, and it has a government that is determined to achieve that vision. Just look at the way that everyone built classrooms to get 9-year basic education off the ground. 9-year basic education hadn't even been thought about when EDPRS was written, right? And it was one of the first policies to be implemented. Having said that, my view, I think I've said it earlier in this presentation, is that looking at what happens, talking to people in Rwanda, that whatever development partner governments may do back home, on the ground, the development partners work within the constraints imposed on them to implement the government's policy. And I think that is very clear, and the government has adjusted to try and take account of some of those things, with things like the project's single implementation unit, so that each ministry has a project implementation unit rather than donors having hundreds, and in terms of the sector-wide approach, where donors can come along and say, this is my contribution to your health policy. We will fund the health package in 3 hospitals, or something like that, right? Which is what happens. So I think that is why Rwanda has been there. So I think it's down an awful lot to the government and the government's determination, but also to supportive development partners, and of course to the very high levels of development assistance. Thank you.
Platform for inviting us to share our experience, but also to pass the message along with regard to how we see CSOs are expected to perform or play their role in ensuring development effectiveness. I am a member of the Better Aid, but I belong to an organization called Reality of Aid Africa, which is a Pan-African organization that has been very active in pushing for this agenda of both aid effectiveness and development effectiveness within the context of facilitating African CSOs to engage effectively with their governments and also the rest of the world in championing African interests in that regard. Maybe we can begin. Now, just to recap, from our perspective, we tried to examine how CSOs have been engaged from 2005 up to date, and what that really means for us going forward in the context of development effectiveness. As you can see in Accra, for the first time CSOs were recognized as independent development actors, and that meant that in terms of consultation and consideration in regard to national development plans, we needed to be involved. But this is different from the Paris Declaration, which only recognized the role of the executive in terms of addressing the development issues within the context of aid effectiveness agenda. But we also criticized that on the basis that we felt that aid effectiveness agenda was more technocratic and really had minimal relations to addressing issues of development. And that is why the conclusion of my colleague Pamela says that she cannot really adduce the relationship between aid effectiveness and the impact, because from our perspective, it was much more technical. We also observed that the problem with both Accra and Paris Declaration is it showed limited improvements in terms of ownership, in terms of conditionality, predictability and transparency, and I'll come back to that as we move forward. But then when we fast forward that to Busan, there's a clear difference and a clear perspective with regard to how we want to address effectiveness. It is about showing results. And in showing results, it recognizes the roles and responsibility of every stakeholder, including the civil society, the government, the development actors, and the private sector. And this recognition is not just at the global level, but rather it should be exercised at the national level. That is why Busan says global light and country heavy. And indeed, I'm grateful that Rwanda CS has seen that indeed for us to be effective, for us to show results for the poor, country heavy must take its shape in the country. Now, what we see as our responsibilities with regard to the Busan outcome, because this is what our governments have signed on to, particularly for Rwanda, it's very special because the president of this country was selected by his peers to go and speak on behalf of African Union on its positions and how it saw issues indeed affecting this continent for the realization of the objectives of the African Union, but more broadly on the development issue. So Rwanda occupies a very special position with regard to steering the implementation of the Busan agenda. Now, with regard to the Busan partnership document, for us as civil society, we think that it is important that we look at how we exploit opportunities that have been provided by the document, but also the threats. And the threats in this regard is the fact that we have very many players that were not there before. We have the South-South cooperation, and then we have the private sector. The South-South cooperation do not want to be measured within the framework of the Busan outcome. They want it to be voluntary. The private sector, on the other hand, were not even at the table when we were negotiating the document. But yet, their prominence in the document is glaring. So the point we're trying to raise is in the context of private sector interest, particularly private sector as conceived in the document, where the domestic private sectors have not been given prominence. What will that really mean in the context of development agenda? But we saw that also as an opportunity, that maybe we need to start talking about business that is development effective, so that the government and other stakeholders here start dialoguing with the private sector in terms of how do they seek to achieve issues of development effectiveness, even as they seek their profit. The other issue that we are also interested in is continuing to monitor and advocate for the full implementation of the Paris Declaration. As you've seen from the report, the government of Rwanda has done its bit. The development partners are still lagging behind. And I don't think that it is fair that we abandon all these commitments and jump onto new ones. From our view, we think that, in fact, we need to still talk about issues of conditionality, because conditionality, in our view, limits democratic ownership and leadership. Because you cannot say that you are in charge of development programs, yet when the government designs its agenda, donors or development partners come with their own programs and want them implemented parallelly. So where is the leadership there? From our perspective, when we impose policy conditionalities, where are the citizens of Rwanda? How do they engage in informing or influencing such policy conditionalities? So I think we need to see, since we committed to eventually removing aid conditions, that we see movements towards that. We also need to see more use of country system. Budget making process has been improved. Procurement rules and procedures have been reformed. Why are donors not taking up these new developments that have taken shape? I think this dialogue that is important that we have, and I don't think that because we have Busan, we need to forget about that and just move on. So in our view, we still need to pursue the objectives of the Paris Declaration and make sure that they are realized, in fact, if possible, before 2015, so that we all start on a clean slate. Otherwise, it will be very difficult and very demotivating for you as to continue insisting that government do this, make these steps, and yet we don't see any movement from the donor side or any uptake of the reforms that have taken place. But I also want to say that indeed the issue of conditionality contributes to low absorption capacity by the government. Because the moment you delay disbursements, the moment you insist on no objection basis, it becomes very no objection basis as a requirement for governments to move on, it becomes very problematic. So I think we need to start thinking around, really, if we buy into this idea that we are moving development effectiveness, then the way in which we do business needs to change. And that's why we think that the unfinished business issue must be addressed. The other issue that we're interested in is that we create enabling environment for civil society organizations. This is very important for civil society organizations because the government of Rwanda, along other governments, agreed in Busan. And if you look at the document, paragraph 22, talks about working with civil society organizations to create their enabling environment in order for them to be able to operate as independent development actors. And in this regard, we have very few requests. That first, it was recognized that the Istanbul principles that have been developed by CSOs and becomes the basis in which we create enabling environment. And in order for this to take shape, we will need to see reforms within the legal framework. We will need to see more stringent rules that CSOs are required to go through be reduced. If we can market the country as an investment destination, that there's a one-stop shop for private sector to go and get them registered. And yet for CSOs, and the number of days are reduced, probably even a day you can get registered. Why do we make it difficult for CSOs? And yet we claim that CSOs receive 400 million and you don't know where that money goes. But at the same time, we make the registration and the operations very difficult. If there is suspicion among the partners, how do you expect us to collaborate as development actors? So it is indeed important that we examine areas that are still difficult for both sectors. In the context of building mutual trust, in the context of deregulating the framework under which CSOs exist, because there are various pieces of law that address CSO issues. There's one for faith-based international NGOs and local NGOs. Why do we need this? And here they are all seated. If you look here, there is everybody. There is the international, there is the local, there is the faith-based, but we want to separate them. Why do we need to do that? I think the most efficient way of addressing closer partnership between ourselves and government is for us to dialogue on which would be the best way for us to be transparent, for us to be accountable, and for us to conduct ourselves as partners. I think that is very important.
Let's start with Kevin.
Thanks very much. My name is Agatete Kevin and I work for Oxfam. I just want to take this opportunity to clarify something. It's been mentioned by presenters, by discussants, that civil society, funding that goes to civil society seems to be off record. And I just feel there is indeed a need to report differently, maybe, because I just want to mention a couple of ways, channels in which the work of the civil society is reported, including even the funds that they receive. So I'll start on government. The money that civil society receives and implements is reported while seeking registration. So civil society does report to migration. International NGOs do report to migration on how they utilize the funds that they had and what they intend to do in the next year, and they give them a clear plan. When they sign MOUs with districts, they also report on what they've done, and particularly to show relevance in districts, so that districts are interested in signing MOUs with them, and also provide the action plans for the coming year. Now, and that also applies to ministries that they sign MOUs with. Now, civil society is also members of sector working groups, where you have to demonstrate your worth in sector working groups. You report on the work that you do, etc. So the same process applies to every time you have to collaborate with a particular government institution. Now, we also do report to our beneficiaries directly and to our donors. So yes, there is mechanisms through which civil society's work and money is reported consistently. I also now want to talk about, so I think there is a need indeed to increase communication, particularly within civil society, because this shows that there is still some members of the civil society who do not grasp, who are not aware of what their sister organizations do. So there is need indeed to increase information sharing among ourselves. I think that's the learning I get from this. Now, I also take this opportunity to talk about offered channels that we feel we can put in place so that information is shared even better. We have, in the next 2 weeks, and it's been mentioned in the training yesterday, we have a civil society breakfast with the press initiative that will initiate monthly. And that initiative will enable us to share information on the activities that we're doing on the ground and on activities that we intend to do, and indeed we'll report on the money and actions that we do. There are several websites as well. The platform has one, and we set up a digital information platform for the civil society as well to continue promoting much more reporting on what we do. So just wanted to clarify that from that back, for the debate to be channeled against the backdrop that reporting of what civil society does is indeed practiced frequently and systematically. It's just that there is the need to increase, to share information among ourselves on how, on what one organization is doing in their district. And I think that's precisely the mandate of the civil society platform, to collect all that information and put it together. So I think it's important that we support our own platform to understand what organizations do. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I think most of my concerns Garita has raised them. I just have a question of clarification on
I heard Mr. Benjamin mention some 400 million something, and that was received by civil society, and when you got the ground, there's nothing to show for it. I would like to know some clarification of that, because as part of civil society for some time, I know the one civil society is doing great work. And you see some of it when you go to the field, you see a lot of activities, development work that is done by civil society in different districts. So, maybe I missed that part, sorry I came in late. Could you clarify more about the money and not seeing the equivalent of the use of the money on the ground? Thank you.
I think it's a clarification, just to add on what Dr. Fodis have just said. There was a study conducted in 2011 about the support, financial support being given to the civil society, and it was focusing on the year 2010. And the major outcome of that was that civil society are doing a lot, as you said. The impact is there. But the problem was the civil society has not been able to actually report on what they are doing. And even if the information was not captured anywhere in the EDPLS reporting process or system. So the money has been, and actually if I went back to the report, it showed that around 70,000 million out of the 420 went to the local civil society organizations. So it means around 340 was utilized by international NGOs. That's how an aggregate, a small aggregate on that. But the issue is not that the impact is not there, but it's not reported. It's not captured in the government reporting system. And I think also you remember that since last year, there was a concern that development partners are reporting their aid, their support through the DAD system. But civil society, local civil society are not. And as well as even international NGOs, they are not doing that. So the problem was, how can even civil society organizations make their activities and the financing more transparent and more, and also report it so that it's also captured in the aid and development effectiveness processes in the country. So I think that was the major issue. And during the last DPR in Gisenyi, in Rubavu, there was also a target for civil society organizations that was set for civil society organizations also to make another step to reporting and making more transparent the aid and the development work they are doing. I think there are also other steps that have been made so far, so that we start reporting and also making it part of the global aid, ODA, that is coming to the country.
Thank you. Again, my name is Lane Mears. I'm the chair of the Network of International NGOs. Just a couple comments. I don't know the accuracy, or I don't contest the accuracy of the numbers, the amount of money coming in to civil society organizations or to international NGOs. I haven't seen the aggregate amounts. It may very well be in the amounts indicated. But it is my understanding that for many, many months, international NGOs have been requesting to be able to input their financial data into the development assistance database in an effort to be transparent, to be forthcoming, but have not been given access to do so. And so INGOs are very willing to do so that information can be captured by the government of Rwanda and visible, but we've not yet been given access. And so I'd be very happy to hear if there's someone from the Ministry of Finance that, if my information is wrong, I'd be very happy to hear that. Regarding Gatete's comments, I echo his comments that international NGOs certainly do report budget data and our impact and our numbers from our activities consistently to immigration at the district level every year. And I just don't, my perception is that data is just not passed on. And so we're passing that on to the government. I don't think it's being passed on from there. And so we're very much open to passing that on in a way that's more communicable to other interested parties, and we're open to finding out whatever way that is. We're not hiding data. We're voluntarily and legally obligated, I think, in order to be registered to give that data over, and we are doing that. And so if there are ideas about ways we can do that, and so that others can see it, we're open to doing that, since we're already accumulating and turning that data over. And so in regard to Edward's comment that he said the issue is not that there's no impact, but that it's not reported, I respectfully disagree. I think it is reported. Again, it's just not disseminated broadly once it is reported, is my belief. Thank you.
Just to add on what his submission, I think even my contribution to that subject was not in the context in which you took it. Because what I was stating is that the issue is not that you're not able to see the 400 million. Because what is the purpose? Why is the government interested in this figure in the first place? That for me is as usually the key. Is it because you are suspicious that there might be doing some other things with the money? Is it because you are really genuinely interested in the impact issues? And that, for me, I think going forward is something that we ought to discuss. That the information that we seek from each other, apologies, the information that we seek from each other is indeed useful in the context of helping us realize the development objective of our partnership, but not in the context of wanting to monitor the activities and the actions of each other. That for me is very important. So that when we are looking at figures or what is not flowing through us, we must also go above that, beyond that, and examine what impact are actually civil society having at the grassroots level. We never comment on that. And I think it is high time we started talking about that, and it's important that as we move forward in the context of the current agenda, that indeed we examine how we want to strengthen our partnership, how we want to minimize and eventually get rid of suspicion in the context of information sharing, but also in the context of building each other. For me, I think that is more important.
Right. I've got a stack of questions here, so I don't know if I'll get through all of them. I'll just do them in the order I've got them here. The first set of questions I've got is, how do development partners not live up to their commitments? Well, what we have to look at is the agreements that were made at Paris, Accra and Busan, which was to sign up to the aid effectiveness agenda. That has a number of elements to it, which include putting the government in the driving seat, aid being reported on budget, aid funding the countries development programs, technical assistance only being given in the context of government demands, development partners working together to ensure that they don't put high transaction costs on to the government, and development partners using government procurement systems and government financial systems. If we said that the ultimate aim was that all development partners conform to all those agreements, then no development partner in Rwanda is living up to that agreement. During the presentation I showed you that 5, I'll repeat them if you want me to, but 5 out of the 15 development partners that report to the government's assessment mechanism achieved a score of 75 plus or more in the most recent assessment. They were the same development partners that were in the top 5 in the previous year. The same development partners, some of whom only scored 2 or 3%, were also the same ones at the bottom. Specific examples: not all development partners report the aid they're going to give to the government, at least in time for it to be included in the budget, which goes before Parliament. Extremely important for Parliament to do its job of public scrutiny of the government budget. Most aid does not come to Rwanda as general budget support or sector budget support. Not all aid even now is spent through a sector-wide approach. Technical assistance, according to the assessment, is not bad, but if you talk to the government, they say that much technical assistance doesn't really meet their needs, that they're not sufficiently involved in the selection of the technical advisors, for example, that come. So I can carry on. So basically, there is a long way to go before the development partners meet the commitments that they made in Paris, Accra, and Busan. So that's the first one. What is the impact of development partners not meeting those commitments? Aid being spent on other than what it is intended for, improving the lives of ordinary Rwandans. One estimate estimates that that 30% of US aid goes on funding the overheads of the partner organisations that it commissions to implement its aid, because it does it all through project support. That compares, and that's just on the overheads of the partner organisations, that compares with DFID, who calculate that they spend 4% of their aid on overheads. So if the money is spent through parallel implementation units, it costs money. If the money aid is tied, in other words, the goods, services, personnel have to become from the partner country, that undoubtedly costs more than purchasing it locally or using local nationals. So the point about the aid effectiveness agenda is it's about using aid more effectively, both to fund the government's programme and to use it in the most efficient and effective way, so that the American dollar or the UK pound or the European euro or the Japanese yen has the maximum impact in supporting Rwanda and the people of Rwanda to achieve their development goals. There's lots of examples in the report. I can't remember them all. Right, civil society organisations. Yes, of course the civil society organisations report to the government. I wasn't suggesting they don't. In fact, there is a debate about the aid effective agenda and its impact on civil society organisations. Some commentators think that the insistence that all aid should go through government actually mitigates against being able to have strong civil society organisations funded independently. Because if all the aid goes to the government, even if civil society organisations are funded, it's the government that makes the decisions about the funding of them. So I wasn't trying to suggest there shouldn't be civil society organisations. Of course, many civil society organisations are funded by means other than official development assistance. Right, someone's asked me what should be the distribution between general budget support, sector budget support. Right. The most effective way of enabling the government to deliver its agenda is clearly for the government to have control over its expenditure. That means general budget support. I think the government would say that if it can't have general budget support, then sector budget support is the next best thing, because that enables it at least to fund its policies within a sector. Remember also, though, do keep in mind that this is still a partnership. When the EU, the World Bank, give development aid in Rwanda, they are part still of the monitoring, evaluation, the development and the implementation of EDPRS. Also remember that there are often conditionalities attached to development aid. I think the recent events here, which I don't want to get embroiled in debates about, demonstrate the fragility sometimes of development aid and conditionalities, which again can make aid unpredictable. If aid is unpredictable, which it is on the whole, doesn't come in a year for which it's intended, some donors stop it for different reasons. The Swedes did in 2008 without the more recent events. That has a direct impact on people on the ground, right? It's not the government school that's no longer funded, it's people's schools that are no longer funded. Right, I think I've answered that. Right, gender equality. Tracking what's spent on gender equality is very difficult. I guess, right? That is why the government is committed to gender-based budgeting, so that it is possible to ensure that men and women usually, because women have been the underrepresented, those that have been marginalised, those who have been less likely to benefit, can benefit equally from government funding. The issue in Rwanda, as in most countries, is that gender-based budgeting is still very much in its infancy. So one of the key questions to ask all the time is, you say this is a gender-fair budget, how do I know it's a gender-fair budget? You're going to spend money helping farmers improve their productivity. What have you done to ensure women farmers benefit equally to male farmers from that spending? Have you done any review to see what the inequalities are, and therefore how you might address those inequalities? So it is very difficult to look at gender-based budgeting. Right, I've probably got lots of others, but the final one I'm going to answer is, someone's asked me, why am I saying the issue about the productive sector? Development aid was originally, and still is, primarily directed at human development. That is what, go to the UK, go to Europe, taxpayers there think they are funding. They think they are funding human development, improving the lives of ordinary Rwandans. That was what the Global Compact was about. What has happened more recently, although probably people always knew it, but what has come onto the agenda more recently is the issue of if you just keep investing in improving human development, it doesn't necessarily lead to sustainable growth and development. And that has led to the view that development aid should also be invested in the productive sectors to support economic growth and development. But it is still a relatively small proportion of aid in Rwanda that goes to the productive sector as such. The governance sector, the human development sector. So I think that has been where the agenda has come from in terms of development aid. I'm going to stop there because I've gone on for ages. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Just to supplement what Professor Pamela has just said, especially around some critical issues related to delivery or commitment by government partners on certain agreements, ranging from the Accra Declaration, Paris Declaration, and the recent one, the Busana outcome. Now, the question is, have the donor development partners met their commitments? It is clear from our report, and that's why we do not want to just hold a public dialogue without evidence. That's why we conducted the research to weigh whether how these development partners and the government made their commitments in line with both the Paris, the Accra Declaration, the Paris Declaration, and the Busana. What do we see here? What we have seen is, as much as the government has made some tremendous progress, one, in ensuring that the aid disbursed or given to the country is put into use, effectively put into use, though there are certain challenges. We still see some critical challenges as regards meeting the targets from development partners. We have seen, if you see from the report, there is a table clearly indicating some countries that are seriously in red. These commitments were agreed on, and these development partners signed together with the government on the same round table and agreed that in order to have effective development, ABCD should be agreed on. But what we see here is several commitments are not met. Then the question should be, then another question comes, what is the impact of if these development partners are not meeting their targets or commitments? Obviously, it is clear that not meeting certain targets according to the declarations that were made both from the Accra, Paris, and the Busana, then it is clear that there is an erosion of ownership. Ownership is eroded. It means that the aid disbursed in a country in such a way that it does not meet the commitments made, then the ownership is not there. If there is total fragmentation, if aid is not delivered according to the country system, if all those. It also diversifies the strategic impact. The government represents the Rwandan citizens. The government is close to the people, identifies the issues, the strategic issues that people are facing, ranging from poverty, health, education, and all that. Then, if the donors don't meet their commitments, it means, and they deliver aid in a fragmented manner, it means that the delivery of strategic objectives will not be harmonized. And therefore, you find that what the government has set out to deliver strategically is not met. Obviously, there is fragmentation of priorities. What the donors want to deliver on is not what is the strategic objective of the government and its people. And therefore, you find there is that conflict in delivery. And who suffers here? Of course, it is like the other saying that when two elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. It's the poor person in Karongi, in Nyanza, in Rulindo that will suffer from such a kind of lapses that do happen. What can Rwanda do so that development partners meet their commitments? It is clear from our report. As civil society, we have made our research and found out what is happening on the ground in terms of delivery of services, in terms of what the government has committed to do and what it has done and to what extent, and the challenges it is facing. We have weighed, on the other hand, what the development partners have committed to do and what they have delivered, and we have come up with a conclusion indicating what the donors should be doing and what the government should be doing at the same time as civil society, what should be our role. It is clear from this report, both from the report, which is more detailed, but the policy brief is much more clear because it analyzes all these issues. But you can read for yourself, but the overall, the central point is the donors should live to the expectations and should honor the commitments they made in Paris, renewed in Accra and Busan. They should continue proactively to support the government's development strategies. That is clear. And on part of the government, the government should continue to take firm leadership of the development agenda and to engage with various stakeholders, including the civil society. And as civil society, we should continuously highlight these issues and engage in policy dialogues like these ones to ensure that certain critical issues are met and the issue, at the end, poverty is reduced and our people are happy. That's what we all aim to do. That's it from me.